Okay.
So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the July meeting of Progressive Legacy. Our guest today is Delegate Brooke Lierman, Representative District 46 in Baltimore City. Brooke is a candidate for Maryland's Comptroller. And a little bit of background from her. I understand she went to Dartmouth, which I went to Princeton, so pay attention to that. She's been a member of the General Assembly since 2015, and I believe now she serves on the Transportation and Environment Committee and previously on the Appropriations Committee. And we're glad to have her today so she can tell us about her campaign. And she'll speak for a few minutes and then we'll open up to questions and we'll try to end by 6 o'clock, if not before. So without further ado, Brooke Lierman.
Well, great. Thank you so much for having me, Alan. Really appreciate all that you do and your great work in organizing and just throughout the years. You're a real leader in Montgomery County, and I really, and the state, and I really appreciate you and the work that you do. And all of you, great to see you all tonight. Thanks for continuing to organize and advocate. It's more important than ever, you know. I mean, we have to persist. And so I just really appreciate all the work that you're doing. Great to see my friend Marilyn on. She's my Emerge sister, and really appreciate all of her work as well. So again, thank you so much for joining and for having me on tonight. It's great to be here. So I won't talk for too long because I would love to get to your questions, but I do want to say, you know, I have had the honor and the pleasure of serving in the Maryland House of Delegates now for 2 terms. And I've loved that work, you know, working with Speaker Adrian Jones, working with the Montgomery County delegation, serving my constituents. But I know that in 2022, we have the opportunity to really chart a new course for the state and to think big after, you know, this really challenging year that we've gone through. Because I think what we've seen is, you know, we've all been in the same storm throughout the past year, but certainly every Marylander has not been in the same boat. And so this next election is our opportunity to ensure that moving forward, every Marylander, every community, every small business is in a seaworthy boat, right? That our statewide elected officials are really low. You know, you're the tip of the spear on this. So I'm just excited to be a statewide advocate and champion who will, you know, focus on eliminating barriers, creating opportunity, you know, tackling the racial wealth divide, confronting climate change, just working each and every day for you and for every Marylander. So I spent the last 7 years working in the General Assembly on our state's Appropriations Committee, advocating for and organizing with the communities in my district, helping oversee our pension as chair of the Pension Oversight Committee, you know, passing legislation to uplift families and small businesses and fight climate change. And so, and as a civil rights and disability rights attorney, where I practice across the country. And I know and I understand that our state comptroller is really uniquely situated to focus on the income-based issues in our state, right? The economic challenges that people are facing. And I'm really excited to bring a bold new vision to that office. Because, you know, the comptroller, it just has so many roles. The comptroller is a member of the all-important Board of Public Works, which really holds the power of the purse, is vice chair of the State Retirement and Pension Board, which makes sure that we are getting to, you know, our pension dollars out to our almost 500,000 state retirees fairly and accurately. You know, one of only 3 statewide elected officials in the state. So having that bully pulpit is so important. And then, of course, it's like to remind people, I'm really sorry, I'm running to be your next tax collector. But it's so important, you know, making sure that everybody pays their fair share, but only their fair share, you know, making sure that those folks who are avoiding paying taxes, that we are really cracking down on those huge companies or the wealthiest who, you know, some people who don't want to pay. Most people do want to pay, right? But we've got to make it easier to pay. And we got to make sure that everybody is paying their fair share. So the bottom line is really that the comptroller is the first person to see the numbers that tell the story of how Maryland families and businesses are doing. And I'm really excited to be a comptroller who helps ensure that those numbers are looking good for all of us. So why for all of us? So brief background and sort of the defining belief that I carry with me is, in the words of Senator Paul Wellstone, who I used to work for, that we all do better when we all do better. And I think actually the pandemic has been a great demonstration of that, and the need to vaccinate people demonstrates like we are no stronger than the weakest link. Like we are all in this. We have to work together to make sure that everyone is doing better. As Alan said, I'm a Whitman graduate, class of 97, and went off to Dartmouth. Really worked hard to be an advocate there. I helped start a mentoring program working with young kids who lived in a nearby public housing development. And really learned to love being an advocate and working with people to ensure that they were reaching their full potential. So after doing a number of other things, I went off to law school. And for the past 11 years, I've been fortunate to work at a firm where I've been able to champion people who need an advocate most, real underdogs. I've represented a man who spent over 21 years in jail for a murder he didn't commit to get him, basically dollars owed. I represent people with disabilities who just want a fair shot at realizing their potential. I represent low-wage workers who aren't being paid what they're owed. And a couple years into my job, somebody said to me, "Oh, I know the kind of lawyer you are. You're the kind of lawyer who give people a voice." And I said, no, that's actually not what I do. My clients have a voice. My job is to make sure that their voice is being heard. And I just also saw in my new adopted home in Baltimore that there were so many communities who weren't being heard. I would try to take the bus to get to work and it would never come. For me, that was inconvenience. But for the 1/3 of Baltimoreans who don't have a car and are trying to get to work, that's not an inconvenience, right? It's a disaster. I visited schools because I was looking, we were hoping to send our children to public schools, and every school we visited, you couldn't drink water out of the water fountains because there's lead in the pipes. My son is a rising 3rd grader now, and he goes to a wonderful school with great teachers, but he can't drink water out of the water fountain, which is crazy. I started walking a lot because I couldn't rely on public transit, and I saw just the lack of a tree canopy in neighborhoods all over the city and the urban heat island effect that would cause. So I've always believed that government should really be about eliminating barriers and creating opportunity, but I saw that government wasn't doing that. And so I decided to run for state delegate, knocked on 14,000 doors, held meet and greets, worked with volunteers, and we won. So I've spent the last 7 years really being an advocate for my constituents, but also working at the state level to be an advocate on a variety of issues, frankly. In my district, when people need something, they call me, right? When there wasn't food available at the start of the pandemic, they reached out to me. Church groups would get on so that we knew where food was going to be available. When there was a school that was overcrowded, that principal came to me and said, "We need your help because no one's listening to us at headquarters." Now, we are not only helping to expand that overcrowded school that serves a very low income and disinvested in community, but we are also restoring a blighted building and putting it back into use as a school building, which is really exciting in Brooklyn, actually, in my district. And at the state level, I love doing the coalition building that's needed to craft and pass legislation. So like the bill I authored and passed this year brought 60 organizations together to create the Digital Connectivity Act of 2021. We saw in the past year how horrible the digital divide was in our state. And yet we were one of the very few states that didn't have an office dedicated to closing that gap and getting every citizen and every person in the state online. Now, I'm very glad to say that we do, because of this legislation, to create the Office of Statewide Broadband. I also worked with gun groups all over the country and the state or gun violence prevention groups, I should say, to make sure that we could pass legislation that created the state's first public health-oriented, evidence-based gun violence prevention program that actually the White House and President Biden and Vice President Harris, they're now working on funding programs like the one that we've created. And of course, legislation to finally fund our transit department to ensure our state's buses and light rail no longer break down, and to end our state's dependence on single-use plastics to tackle climate change. But, I continue to see the challenges, the economic challenges that people are facing. And I firmly believe that we cannot go, quote, back to normal after this pandemic, right? Even before this pandemic, there were 80,000 food insecure families in Montgomery County. Like that is not, that's not okay, right? We can do better. So I'm excited to use this election that we as a state have the opportunity to slingshot ourselves to the next level, to become a state that nurtures small businesses, uplifts communities, and pushes to ensure everyone can reach their full potential. So 3 quick things, and then love to hear your questions. As comptroller, I'm really dedicated to being present and proactive. If you're following me on social media or you get my emails, you know I am running a 24 county campaign and I am going to be a 24 county comptroller. I'm excited to be present, working with you, with your organizations, with your churches, senior centers, and elsewhere, making sure that we are showing up for you to help. There are 12 field offices all over the state that the comptroller's office runs. I'm really excited to reinvent those, to make sure that they're working with our community partners to support entrepreneurs and small business owners, doing tax prep work, doing financial literacy work. There's so much that we can do. And I want to use the power of the purse to make sure we're building generational wealth and increasing prosperity requirements, right? That we're supporting our Black-owned businesses, our women-owned businesses, our immigrant-owned businesses, making sure that they have the opportunities to succeed here in Maryland and thrive and create wealth. We want to make sure that businesses start in Maryland and stay in Maryland. And finally, I want to make sure that we are focused on modernizing the office and increasing transparency and accountability. So what does that mean? Well, I think it's time to start thinking about how to make paying your taxes as easy as paying a phone bill, right? If you're a small business or a family, you should have an account with a comptroller's office. You should be able to log in and see your past tax filings, any debts, fees, all in one very secure and easy to access for you place so that you can keep track of everything. I also think our financial records should be an open book. We should have openbookmaryland.com where you could follow every single dollar spent by the state, because we all deserve to know what the state is doing with our money. And Open Book Maryland will ensure that every Marylander and every Maryland business knows what the state is paying for, how it's paying for it, and when it's being paid. And for all of this to sort of sum up, I want to make sure that we are finally harnessing and using the data of the comptroller's office, because it's the hub of all financial data in the state. So we should be using that to help our local governments, to help our industry groups, to work with municipalities, to work with county council members, to work with all of you, so that we can target our resources where they're needed. So these are just a few of the many important ways that the statewide office can help us build the state that I think we all know Maryland should be. I often said when I first ran for office, and I say it now, I am not running to hold a job. I am running to do a job. I'm running to do the job of putting the comptroller's office to work for every Maryland family, business, and community. And I think we are at a once in a generation moment for this state to ensure that we're taking lessons from the pandemic, lessons from the racial reckoning we're going through, and that we're building a state where everyone can meet their full potential. So you might not know, but this is the very first time that this seat has been open since 1998. Pretty amazing. And we have the opportunity to reimagine what this office can do, I think, for Marylanders. So I'm running for comptroller to do that. Also to break a glass ceiling, as we've never had a woman comptroller, but most importantly, to be your advocate, to work with you to build a better Maryland. So I can't do it without you. I hope I can earn your support in next June's election. And I also hope between now and then, you'll consider getting involved. Whether that's time, talent, or treasure, we would love to have your support and help between now and next June. So thanks for having me tonight, and I look forward to your questions.
So thank you, Brooke. That was questions from the group. Hank.
Yes, you're very well and accomplished speaker. It's a delight listening to you. You're very nice. It's nice to hear your thoughtfulness. The question we've been dealing with is the widening of our Beltway and 270. The game is afoot with Hogan. It's all smoke and mirrors, and we're looking for an idea of who is going to be in charge of that kind of process and what they intend to do in the future?
Yes, it's a great question. So I have followed this for years. My mother lives in Bethesda. My brother's in Tacoma Park. My dad until recently lived in Chevy Chase. So I know all of these areas very well. I've sat in my fair share of traffic. And I want to start by saying that I do not believe that it's inevitable that we have traffic around DC and up to 70, and that we have to work to do better for people because it's incredibly difficult for people to live their lives stuck in gridlock, right? And it's not good for the environment. It's not good for anybody. It's not good for business. However, I have been very frustrated, I will say almost from day one, with the plan that the governor put forward. When he put out his pre-solicitation report, almost instantly, the Department of Legislative Services raised serious alarms and red flags about the process, about their concern over 50-year contracts, and about the fact that we never did, and we still haven't done, an accurate analysis of how the state could fund this versus handing it all over to a private corporation. We built the ICC, not an inexpensive road, right? Through the ordinary public procurement process. And so it's very frustrating to me that we have dragged out this fight and there has been no working with local officials by the Hogan administration, rather than sort of starting and saying, oh, look, there's a lot of narrowing north of Gaithersburg and on 270. Let's start with some fixes there, to do immediate work. And we can do that using our transportation trust fund dollars. We can expand our debt issuances, So I am very concerned about the process and the ideas that the administration has put forth. I've supported and worked with Delegate Solomon and Delegate Corman on their legislation over the past few years to make sure that we're doing responsible public-private partnerships and that we're holding this administration, but also in some ways, even more importantly, the next administration, that we are ensuring that they are following through on the promises that this administration has made to the communities around the Beltway, because there have been very many promises made. And we've got to make sure that they're upheld. So I hope that helps. I'm, frustrated by the process, concerned about a long-term agreement with a private corporation, but absolutely agree, that we do need to do something to make sure we start getting serious about alleviating traffic.
Okay.
I have a question. Why is it that it hasn't been open since 1998, the position?
Sure, great question. And I just saw my friend Dan Rupley join. Nice to see you, Dan. The comptroller's office is up for election every 4 years, just like the governor, but there hasn't been an open seat since 1998, which means an open seat is just terminology for that the sitting candidate isn't running again. So it's up for grabs, basically. So Schaefer, Goldstein died. Louis Goldstein, our former comptroller, he passed away, and Schaefer ran and won in 98. And then in 2006, there wasn't an open seat, but Peter Franchot challenged William Donald Schaefer, as probably many of you remember, as well as Janet Owens. There was another person in the race too. Of course, we all know Peter Franchot won, and the rest is history.
Oh, interesting.
Yep. So we've never had a woman comptroller. We've never had a woman governor. We've never had a woman attorney general. We're one of only a couple states in the country that has never elected a woman to independently elected statewide state office. So
It's about time then.
I agree. Your help.
Brooke, Craig and Gail Carter, we want to support you in your
thank
effort
you.
going forward, and congratulations on what you've done so far. We are the proud parents of Neil Carter, who said hello.
Nice. Neil's great. Oh, that's awesome. It's so fun.
Thank you. As a recent retiree, I have a concern about taxes.
Yep.
There's probably 14% or more of the constituents of the state of Maryland are seniors. Mm-hmm. We carry an advocacy for voting on a lot of issues, but as a retiree, I'm paying.
Yep.
A lot.
You are, and I think it's a great point. And I would love to hear your thoughts and ideas sometime. we are working together. We are working to put out, and anybody who's interested, working to put out some information on ideas for our seniors, and we're open. The Comptroller's office, of course, doesn't control tax policy, but does control tax administration and other ideas, and can be an advocate, right, on different topics and policies. So, I want to make, one of my focuses, of course, will be as comptroller to make it affordable to retire here, right? I want people to stay here. And so, whether that's promoting, ways to do private long-term care insurance, convenient transportation options, fair taxation, affordable housing, which doesn't necessarily mean low income housing, but just straight up, like, can you afford to live in the places, including remaining in your current homes, right? Or ability to downsize and not necessarily losing the homestead tax credit, right, that you've gotten over the years. There are things like that I'm very cognizant of. And definitely, I would love to hear anybody on this call's ideas. I put my email in the chat, so please feel free to email me. And I mean that. I have several folks who are interested in this area too, so would love to hear your thoughts and ideas. But I agree. Thank you for raising that. It's something that I'll be very focused on, and we'll keep in touch about.
One of the areas that I was really interested in was that you were involved in state policy around pensions. And I've always thought that there was money to get by adjusting the advisor fees that the state pays to big investment companies. Is this something that you've worked on? And is there hundreds of millions of dollars that might be gained by the state for if we reduce the investment fees?
That is a great question. That is a huge concern of mine, and I would say several other members of the Oversight Committee on Pensions share that concern as well. So a couple years ago, we were so concerned that we passed legislation requiring the state retirement and pension system to start bringing some of its investing decisions in-house. So traditionally, like 100% of the invested was farmed out to firms. And so we have now set up a process and the pension system said, oh, well, we can't pay, we can't compete. And we said, no, we will create a way for the pension system to hire investors and compensate in a way, recognizing that that's a different type of category than other state employees, perhaps. They're all different types, but this is its own, and this is different in ways too. So we have now begun the process of moving some of those decisions in-house. And we are large enough that it makes sense to do that, right? When you're a small fund, it doesn't make sense, but we are big. And so I am totally in agreement with you. Actually, Senator Elfreth, who's my co-conspirator or co-chair from the Senate side on the Oversight Committee, we're having a hearing, or not a hearing, just a it's something that we're very concerned about. So we will have hearings in the fall, and I expect this topic to come up then as well. We do 3 oversight hearings every year in the fall, and this topic is already on the agenda to talk with the system about what they're doing to rein in costs and how they're doing in terms of bringing investment in-house. So it's a great thought. It's really important. It's very frustrating to think about how much we're paying in fees.
Annie Brown.
Yes, I don't have a question. I do have a comment. I'd just like to thank you for that very dynamic perspective on the Office of the Comptroller, because it's not one that I tend to think about in that way. And it's been just very interesting, and I could just support you on that presentation, but I'll be able to speak intelligently to other folk to get interested in that office.
That's
I
great.
really appreciate that.
Yes, and I'm going to try to dig it up while I'm on here with you. I made a little video about the Comptroller's office. And if you follow me on Facebook, I did post it there at one point, but I also have a YouTube page. And I made a cartoon all about the comptroller's office, because, you know, why not? Who doesn't want to watch a cartoon about the comptroller's office, right? So I'll make sure to post it here so that you can see, so you can check it out and share the link as well.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions right now? I've got one. If you don't, Rosie.
I wanted to know what the controller's office could do about environmentally.
Sure, great question. A lot, actually. You know,
Oh,
I've spent a
okay.
lot of time working on environmental issues throughout my time in the legislature, and I'm very focused on them. And so I have a policy agenda online. If you go to brookelierman.com, you can just click on priorities and you'll see my policy agenda. But one of the items that you'll find is on how to make sure that we have a green, clean future. Because if you think about it, climate change, what it is it is a threat to our economy, right? And to our entire way of life. It is the biggest threat. And so I want to make sure that we are creating healthy, green, and sustainable communities in every part of the state. And part of that, of course, is making sure that we are spending our taxpayer dollars in a resilient, climate resilient way. So identifying areas of greatest risk, analyzing implications for the state's budget, you know, implications of climate change, ensuring climate resilience planning and financing become a priority for decision makers at every level of government. You know, really channeling capital essential for climate mitigation and adaptation. You know, setting, like, I think we should develop a set of criteria to evaluate state expenditures based on equity and justice impacts in terms of also environmental justice impacts. And I want to create a climate resilience officer in the comptroller's office that would advise me on procurement practices, investments, planning, risk reduction, environmental justice concerns, and more. Want to make sure we're holding polluters accountable, that we're doing environmentally sustainable state procurements, and just, you know, making sure that we're constantly thinking about how one step mitigating to the, as best we can, and also preparing for climate change. Great question.
I don't know whether I can be heard.
We can hear you, Dan. Speak up, though.
Yes, Brooke, you know that I'm one of your most loyal advocates and enthusiasts. What are the ramifications of being a working mom and running for state office? Share that with us.
Sure. You know, I think, you know, most of my colleagues who are my age are either working dads or working moms and are in office or running for office. And I think it's a really important perspective to have. You know, I think, you know, many of you are parents, and I think it's important for our elected officials to be able to know what the costs of childcare are, right? How difficult it is to find a nanny, what homeschool, you know, what it meant when we went all of a sudden to Google Classrooms, right? These are important perspectives that, you know, it's worthwhile for our elected officials to understand, because we all have different lived experiences. And so it's just essential, I think, that we have some people in, you know, state office who understand what it's like right now to be raising children, and that who I am very invested in my children's future. But I also have to tell you, like, when I'm going around my district and around the state, you know, I know my kids are going to be okay. I'm really invested in everyone else's kids too, right? Because I firmly believe that we all do better when we all do better. I think that by creating a better state for everybody's kids, like my kids are going to do better too. And so I feel very personally invested in the future of Maryland.
Thank you.
Sure.
So, Brooke, I have another question. If I recall correctly, there was some murders in your district down at Fells Point a few weeks ago, and I knew that you stepped up and made some comments about that. What do you think we can do in this? And we've done a lot in the state of Maryland. What else can we do to make Baltimore and make the state safer from gun violence?
It's a great question. Yeah, there were a couple of shootings in Fells Point about a month ago, and it was really, or a month and a half ago, and it was very disconcerting. The bottom line is that everybody deserves to live in a safe and healthy neighborhood, right? And that's what I'm constantly working for in Baltimore and around the state. So I'll just give a shout out to the program that I helped create a few years ago, which is called the Violence Intervention and Prevention Program. This is a program at the state level that funds these evidence-based initiatives to prevent gun violence from happening rather than, policing our way to safety, which I don't think works, right? I think we need accountability and we need enforcement of laws, but we also must have a way to stop the deaths and stop the shootings from occurring, period, right? So these kinds of programs are proven to work. They've worked in many other cities and states around the country. They've worked in Baltimore in Safe Streets, ROCA, some of the other hospital-based violence intervention programs that we see. They have incredible rates of success. And the problem often is that we don't scale up. Like, we, in the initial year of the VIP program, the Violence Intervention and Prevention Program, the governor put in $5 million. This was in 2018. And then he never put another cent in. And so 2 years ago, we had to do a bill mandating that we have a couple $1 million a year for this program. He vetoed that bill, right? So then we had to override the veto this year, which means it's still like another year until it actually goes into effect in the budget. So it's this sort of really frustrating, and it's small beans, right? The state of California, Massachusetts, other states, they're putting in, over $10 million a year into these kinds of programs. In California's case, way more than that, but they have a much bigger budget. And so to me, it's just, we really have to decide if we want to double down on really funding programs that the evidence show work at preventing gun violence, because these are programs where they are in the community. They are working with people at an everyday basis, on an everyday level, to get them out of the streets, to get them jobs. When they know that there's a fight that's about to occur, they go in, they say, it's not worth it, don't do this. Like, they have those established relationships, right? We also have to really work, I think, to make sure we're diverting mental health crises and mental health needs to mental health practitioners rather than throwing people in jail or taking up the police time to go to deal with mental health responses that they are frankly not trained to handle often. So I think we are starting to do that more and more. In Central Maryland, there's a new program coming online that's called GBRICS. I don't know what it stands for. I only know the acronym, but what it is, it's all the big hospitals in Central Maryland working together to create dedicated lines and staffing for mental health needs rather than, so instead of calling 911, you'll call a different number, you'll be dispatched, a social worker will be dispatched, and there'll be somebody to go meet that person's needs. So those are the kinds of programs that, although expensive, in the long run end up saving the state so much money and also save lives, right? And when you lose one person, when somebody's murdered, it's not just an effect on that one person, right? It's their kids, it's their nephews, it's their nieces, it's their mom, their dad, their uncles. It ricochets across society. It's incredibly heartbreaking and tragic. So want to make sure that we're really thinking big at how to use our dollars in a way that's effective.
So you see yourself continuing that advocacy as comptroller?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because it's good use of taxpayer dollars, right? I think so. Yes, absolutely.
So that would be a different role, because we don't see the current comptroller, who is regarded as being pretty successful over the course of his tenure, notwithstanding his coziness with the incumbent governor. But this would be a different level of advocacy for one of the constitutional officers. So good for you.
Yeah, no, I feel very strongly about that issue. In fact, I have a webinar coming up about it in a couple of weeks. So, yep.
Who else has got a question? I've got one. So you talked about the environment and green future. Are you in favor of divesting from fossil fuels in the state portfolio?
Yeah, I think we have to, we have fiduciary duties, right, as a state board. So we have to make sure we're always meeting our fiduciary duties. But I'm 100% committed to a just transition, to making sure that we are putting our money in places that are not funding fossil fuel companies, which are a bad deal for Maryland taxpayers, but instead are looking towards industries that are growing and flourishing, and making sure that we are supporting a green future rather than one based on fossil fuels.
So you have a really interesting perspective from your committee assignments on the state budget. And I was wondering what your opinion is about how well we've managed the budget over the last couple of years. Some of us, I know I personally was against casino gambling when we had that referendum. Betting is now on the scene. Look like we're going to, for some reason, we need to pass a constitutional amendment to legalize marijuana and get that revenue. It seems like a weird way to run the railroad when you need to go to gambling and pot to fund the government. Do you have any perspective on sources of income and whether or not it's been worth the bargain on gambling?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, in addition to, I understand that perspective and so well. In addition to funding for education, it also has created a number of good paying jobs. The casinos pay well, they're union jobs. So I think that that's also, an additional plus. But I certainly understand and feel conflicted about, the idea of, gambling as a source of revenue. I think many people do. And I think for different, I do think we have to have serious conversations about our transportation trust fund and how we're going to fund transit and roads in the future. The gas tax just doesn't, it's not working, right? We have big needs. I'm very hopeful that the federal government will pass this big infrastructure bill, which would be huge, not just for Maryland, but for the whole country. That is really what we need, right? At the end of the day, there's only so much that we can do as a state. And we need the federal government to help out with some of this too, because they've been helping out less and less, and we need them to step up. So that's a big deal. And I will say, that in terms of education funding, I passed a bill last year to create more transparency at the Bureau of Revenue Estimates, which is a part of the Comptroller's office. And so there will now be online reporting about the Blueprint for Maryland's Future Fund, the Blueprint Fund. So this is the money that will fund the implementation of the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, our big education reform bill that we passed last year, which is huge. And we have to make sure it gets fully funded and implemented. Otherwise, it will have all been for naught, right? So we are on our way to full funding. We are doing well. It is partially funded out of the online sales tax. So if you buy something on Amazon or Zappos or some other, you are paying a sales tax, and part of that is going to our schools now, the most of it. So that's an important part of funding our schools, and we're doing well. We're fully funded through the next 3 years. So we want to make sure that we continue on that road and that we're funding it appropriately.
Yeah. Can I ask one question?
Of course.
Since we are focusing on one office, what happens if we don't get a Democrat governor?
Well, hopefully I'll win and I'll be there to do the things that we need to do.
Okay. All right.
I
Wouldn't it be
can't
easier?
run. It's a lot for me to raise the money to run one campaign.
Yeah. Wouldn't it be easier for you though?
Oh, well, sure. I'd
So
love
that
to
we
have a
have to-
Democratic. Of course. Oh my gosh. Oh, of course. It has been, I can't even explain how challenging it has been over the last, 7 years. We try, but it has been incredibly challenging. And so I, of course, support, whoever the Democratic nominee is. And I am, we are blessed to have a plethora of really phenomenal candidates this year. And that's exciting. And I'm also excited to be, I guess I'm not excited to be the only Democratic woman running statewide, but I am excited that at least there is a Democratic woman running statewide. So happy to fill that role as well, to bring my perspective too. So thank you. This is great. Thank you, everybody.
So I had a question about the tax collection from the corporation, since you brought that up. Very interesting. Is there a way to do this, or is there a big unpaid tax bill by some of these corporations?
Sure, there are some really big estimates of unpaid tax bills. Yes, so I would say there's a number of, I mean, we know that there's a huge amount of unpaid federal taxes, and most of the experts I speak to believe that there's also a huge number of online unpaid taxes in Maryland, and that we really need to up the number of skilled tax attorneys that we have who are auditing and investigating, and that we also have to invest in additional software to catch some of this as well. So I think I've actually started meeting with some people to talk about this. My understanding is that the Comptroller's office used to have over 50 auditors, and it now has around 12. And so, we just have to make sure, that's what I was told. And so we just have to make sure that we are doing the work that needs to be done to make sure that people are paying their fair share, and, to make it easier, right? Like if you're a corporation right now, maybe you don't know what you're supposed to be paying because you can interpret the tax laws in a different way. So for us to be crystal clear, right, to do private letter rulings, which are rulings to individual circumstances, to tell corporations, you need to interpret the law this way for your circumstance, right? So there is no wiggle room. That's important too.
So we've got a few minutes left. We were going to go to about 6 o'clock. Brooke, one of the things that fascinates me about your campaign is your vision for the regional office that the Comptroller has. And I wonder if you could you mentioned them briefly at the outset. I wonder if you could just spend a little more time talking about how you would transform the offices, re-engineer the offices, reimagine the offices so they provide more services to the people in Maryland.
Sure. Yeah. So I just think it's this amazing resource that the Comptroller's office has, that there are these regional offices around the state. And there used to be more. There's 12 now. And my understanding is there used to be like a couple dozen. So I want to make sure that those offices are really focused outwardly, right? Externally. That they are signing up to participate in street fairs, that they are reaching out to churches and senior centers and the Main Street directors in their areas, that they are really making themselves known as a resource on whatever financial needs people have, right? Is it, wow, we are an immigrant organization and we have a number of people who are unbanked. Can you help us figure out a way to make sure that people understand the importance of getting banked? And are there any programs that the Comptroller's office can set up to incentivize people to open bank accounts or credit union accounts, right? What I would love, senior centers. Many people don't know how to claim or don't know which tax credits to claim, right? Doing presentations to those groups or doing Zooms, right? Or recording things that those groups can then use. Having sort of, doing the financial literacy work piece, making sure that you're available to different organizations as well. So I just, I don't want to dictate all the things that would be available because it needs to be community driven, but what those financial needs are, and financial, in that would be within the ambit of the Comptroller's office. I think the Comptroller's local officers could be there and should be. And I hope, if I win, like they will be there to work with community groups. So great question. I'm excited about that. Thanks.
More questions? I have another one. So my experience with state offices is that the permanent career staff, the civil servant, is not very diverse. And I'm wondering if you've seen that yourself, and I know it's probably going to be a priority for you, but do you have any sense of how diverse the Office of the Comptroller is right now and what you can do to make it more representative of women and people of color?
It's a great question. I was just on the phone the other day with somebody who specifically does recruitment for internships with students of color and at HBCUs around the country. You're totally right. And I am just very focused on, I need to be, the Comptroller's office, like any state office, should be reflective of the diversity of the state. And so I will place a premium on making sure that we are, recruiting a diverse workforce. I mean, I think, it's really important to have different perspectives. Like when you don't have people at the table, you're missing out on information that you need to do a good job. and to serve everybody. And so it's very important to me to make sure that we have a diverse workforce, that we have diverse leadership in the agency. Right now, we have a wonderful Black woman who's the deputy comptroller. I hope she stays. There's just a number of very good people. But I also we have to diversify as well and make sure that when we're hiring, we're being intentional.
That's the answer that I wanted to hear.
And I should say that, I mean it about hiring, women and people of color and also people with disabilities. I've represented people with disabilities for many years, and people get overlooked because they think, oh, well, they can't do this or that. It's just not true, and you don't know that until you hire them. And then you're like, whoa, they can do so much, so much more than me. So.
As you traveled around,
Yep.
do the people of Western Maryland and Eastern Shore and Southern Maryland, they basically hold the same views about government, or is there really marked differences between what they do, what they say in Oakland and what they say in Salisbury?
No, I think in general, people want, we want safe, clean, thriving neighborhoods, right? Where we can raise our kids and retire and still afford to go out to nice dinners every once in a while, right? We want people to be safe. We want our neighbors to be safe. We want nice neighborhoods. We want to be able to get around. And we want to make sure we're leaving the world better for our kids, and I think, and we don't want to be left behind, right? And we want to be listened to and heard. And I think in general, whether, if you're talking to folks in Salisbury, maybe there's slightly different how to get to that place, right? Than there is in Baltimore, or there is in, Wheaton or College Park or Cumberland, but it's the same goals, right? And so I think it's just people want to know that they're being listened to and heard and included at the table. And that's part of the reason I've focused so much on being out and about around the state for the past couple months, because I want people to know that I will show up and I will be their comptroller. I'm going to be their advocate. I'm going to be your advocate, right? So thank you for that question.
Sure. And this
is great.
Question. I got one more question.
Oh, sure.
Does the controller have anything to do with whether or not we can buy beer and wine in supermarkets in Montgomery County or throughout the state? I mean, it's been a lingering issue since I came here in 1995.
Yeah.
And I know that the current comptroller has positioned himself as an advocate of small craft brewers and small distillers and things like that. Is that a role for the comptroller, and can we get beer and wine in our supermarkets?
So that is actually a state law. So that's within the purview of the General Assembly. And so that's there, there have been bills. I haven't heard them in my committee. So I don't know all of the details, but I will say, I think there's two sides. Like it's super, yes, it's more convenient, but also when you think about the public health concerns around alcohol, the other side is that the more alcohol that's available, right, the unhealthier we are. Certainly what counts as a grocery store includes like Family Dollar and Dollar Tree and stores like that. So we're talking about putting a lot more alcohol availability in some underinvested in neighborhoods too. So I think that there's two sides, and it's just important to take them both into state. But the comptroller doesn't play a role in that. Instead, it's the General Assembly. But I really appreciate you all having me on tonight. This was really exciting. Great questions from everybody. There's 11 folks on this. If you went out and told, 10 people, we'd grow so much. So I hope you'll consider signing up for my email list at Brooke Lierman BrookeLierman.com, and sharing my email, sharing my social media posts with your friends and family as well. This is going to be a really grassroots driven campaign, and so I just need your help to get the word out to folks. You are the grass tops, right? And we have to get it down to the grassroots. So thank you for your help. I really, really appreciate it.
So thank you so much for joining us this evening, Brooke Lierman, candidate for Comptroller of Maryland. And we'll look for you on the campaign trail.
Absolutely. Have a great night, everyone. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Take care, bro.
Okay.